It seems as if our culture is designed in some ways to destroy families. Not all families, certainly, but it certainly makes it much harder to rear children.
Is it a good sign that there's more work being done because maybe we're catching things that hadn't been caught years ago? Or is it a bad sign that there's more being done because there are more issues?
You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a social worker. You don't have to be a lawyer to actually help a kid right here in the community who's suffering.
All right, grace and peace be with you. I am Dean Owen Thompson with my partner in ministry, Father Brian Blair. He is the canon for mission here at the cathedral. And we bring you another exciting episode of Holy Chaos. It is the place where we love to meet with and discuss ministry and strategy and positive change with those folks who are creating chaos in their communities by doing the right thing. Particularly in a time when we see more of the me, mine, and more dynamic, we want people who are focusing on the we and the us. And so we bring into our midst this morning Tracy Cook, who is the executive director at Pro Kids, which is an amazing organization that does some great work with foster care children, who I would consider, I'm sure as she would agree, some of the most vulnerable in our community. And I'm so glad that she is on the front lines and that we are partnering, seeking to partner more, I would say, in ways that we can do this work together. So I want to welcome Tracy Cook.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.
Great. Good to have you here. And so the way this works is we just want to kind of settle in by asking you some casual questions about you, and then what led you to Pro Kids. And we're going to kind of go back and forth, and we're going to hear your story.
Sounds great.
So what brought you to Pro Kids?
The very short answer is pure selfishness. And what I mean by that is I knew I wanted to do something in public interest. In law school, like many folks, I knew more what I didn't want to do than what I did want to do. I knew I wanted to have an impact, and I knew I wanted it to be as long-lasting as possible. So that got me thinking about children in particular, advocating for them, and the generational change that can come when you work with children. Yeah. So I would describe it as pure selfishness at the end of the day.
That's the kind we need, that's for sure. Now you are rather silent. In our intro, you usually give a little grunt or groan or something.
It's my turn. I'm good to go.
But I wanted to ask Brian to ask a couple of questions that we had prepared to help our conversation along. And you're up.
Tracy, you're the executive director.
Correct.
So maybe you know the history about how Pro Kids was started back in the 1980s, and then if you could bring us to where Pro Kids is today.
Yeah. So Pro Kids began in 1981. It was one of the first programs of its kind, court-appointed special advocates or CASA programs. There were fewer than 25 programs in the entirety of the country. Today, there are about 1,000. So it was really three organizations that came together to found Pro Kids. It was Hamilton County Juvenile Court, which oversees all the kids in child protection system, all the kids in foster care. It was the Cincinnati Bar Association that understood the legal component. And then it was actually the Junior League of Cincinnati that was the first class of volunteers. So those three organizations came together to found Pro Kids. The advocacy was very focused and somewhat limited at the time, but Pro Kids has grown dramatically over the years. Obviously, we're quite old now. I started there in 1992 as a volunteer and joined the staff as an attorney in 93. And the ways that we've grown is, first of all, we've had to adapt. And one of the biggest things we've had to adapt to is more kids coming into the system. So unfortunately, we have experienced in recent years over years increase, beginning around 2009, in terms of the number of kids coming in the system. And so we've grown. Last year we served around 1,000 kids with 300 CASA volunteers. However, the finish line keeps getting moved. And in any given year these days, there are about 3,000 to 3,500 kids under the court's jurisdiction due to maltreatment. The other ways that we've grown is when we knew that we couldn't grow fast enough to get all of the kids right away. Part of what we have had as a strategy is scaling across everybody in the system, all the children in the system. So how can we collaborate to raise everybody's game who's serving our kids? That's very important to us. So it's things like sharing training, leadership groups that come together to wrestle with really difficult problems in the system, which feel like they're getting more difficult by the day, especially this year. And so what we have had as our thought is that ProKids at its most abstract is just a doorway that the community comes through to help our kids. Many folks will be CASA volunteers, will be curious about that, but there are other ways that people have helped as well. And ultimately, because we are welcoming the public in to help, we need to make sure that the entire system and every child who's involved in it benefits from that community involvement.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Sure. Is it a good sign that there's more work being done because maybe we're catching things that hadn't been caught years ago? Or is it a bad sign that there's more being done because there are more issues?
It's a really excellent question, but it's also very complicated. You know, I've been doing this work now for more than 30 years, and the more I do it, the more complexity I see every year. You can have both things happen. So the pandemic is a great example of that. Unfortunately, we knew exactly what would happen when the world kind of shut down. We knew that people who normally would call 241 Kids, the hotline for abuse and neglect, we're not going to be seeing kids in the same way that they were. So that's teachers, coaches, healthcare professionals, all are mandated reporters, et cetera. They wouldn't necessarily be seeing kids. So we knew that reports would nosedive, and that's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, what you see is toward the end of the year, an increase in reports and greater severity, that sort of thing. And so what I would say is, yes, we all need to view our community's children as our responsibilities, but we also need to intervene very carefully. You know, I would argue that among the most intrusive things that a government can do, right up there with capital punishment, is taking a child from the only family they've ever known. So I think the kind of reverence you have to have for that decision making, and it's not just singular decision making, it's decision making every day. Should this child stay in the system or be out of the system? And so the one clear path I will say that I know of is it's incredibly and increasingly important for us to activate the support system that may have frayed around that particular family. Because when many people say, what is the theme that you've seen over all this time? The biggest theme is a lack of support system. Yes, there's substance abuse, there's mental health treatment, there's generational trauma for sure. Many of the parents that we're working with suffered maltreatment as children themselves, never got appropriate intervention or care, began to develop mental health issues, began to self-medicate, and there you go, right? There's that vicious cycle. And so I think thinking about how families come apart, and where there's often a dysfunctional side and a more functional side, and they sometimes divorce themselves, typically after years of the functional side kind of trying to help, but often feeling like they were even enabling, and so they walk away. Well, if that's the overarching theme of a lack of support system, what can we do to reconnect that? So we do have some specialized efforts around what we call family finding.
Thank you.
Yeah, when I counsel couples before marriage, one of the things I say to them is that this culture, despite all the pomp and circumstance and rhetoric around, family values and all those things, the culture really is designed to destroy relationships. And I've had those couples that I've counseled in marriage and seen some of them in divorce situations thereafter, unfortunately. It seems as if our culture is designed in some ways to destroy families. Not all families, certainly, but it certainly makes it much harder to rear children. What would you name are some of those factors that are contributing to what you're seeing and what you're dealing with on a day-to-day?
So a lot of it is this kind of what I would term generational trauma, which is if you have, a parent who, when they were a child, suffered tremendously, did not have the kind of support they needed from a ring out. Because what we always say is things can go sour in anybody's family, but where's that next ring of support? And part of what happens is, and I think there's the overlay of poverty to always think about this too, is who's got resource. And so, there is a certain logic to what you have to do when you don't have a support system.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that we make sure that folks understand who think, who are curious about volunteering with us, who think, oh, I would never abuse or neglect a child. We try and invite them to think about a different circumstance where, let's say you're a single parent, you have no support system, you have a baby who has colic, you have no child care. So I think we have to always think about the circumstances. And so to your point, the circumstances around many of the families we see, the vast majority of them live in poverty and are not the first generation to do so. Right. And so what were the resources that they had to help break a cycle? And if at the very least you had no access to not only safety, and so your entire childhood you felt at risk, but no access to services to help you heal, then what are the chances that any of us would create something different when it's time for us to form our own family? And so that's the very serious thing that we deal with, is that parents who never were able to heal from their own trauma.
It's interesting when you frame it like that. The other part of it, I think, is you only know what you know. So that people who have one particular experience look at others without sort of being open-minded or unwittingly remaining ignorant, let's say. And so they just assume, well, this is what life is all about, so why can't you get on board? But you only know what you know.
Right.
And if you're raised a certain way in a certain neighborhood, you've never gotten out of that neighborhood, and you only know the people you know. That's what you know.
Absolutely. And I think there have been, just experiences that have caused me to have a revelation about how to think about things. I will never forget being in a meeting with a mother and her sister, and other folks involved were talking to them about the need to protect children from, unfortunately, generational sex abuse within the family. And the mother and the aunt started to laugh. And they said, what do you mean? Because in a world where you have to work, where you have no child care, and the only people in your sphere of influence are the people who harmed you, but yet you have somehow survived, they were very clear. It's a matter of when, not if, and how unrealistic of us to think that there could be such resource coming around the family that could be prevented. So I think we learn from each other. And so learning that, right, that makes sense in your world, that you had to leave your baby, you felt like, with the uncle who had done that to you, because you literally couldn't feed your child unless you go to work. So that's part of it, is we're all learning. We're all kind of dealing with our own preconceived notions. And how do we provide the actual resource? How do we help parents who don't have support systems grow them and develop them? Reunification is always our goal whenever it's possible. If it's not, then we do look at relatives, we look at family friends, and potentially at adoption. But I think families are the key. We routinely find, scores of relatives that are unknown to the county, to the child protection system. And often they have become disconnected over time with the parents, and they can be reconnected.
And so in addition to the CASA folks, who else is on your team that helps you with this work on a day-to-day?
So our CASA volunteers actually work within a team themselves. And so the CASA volunteer becomes, in essence, the expert on the child. There's no one in the child protection system that has the kind of luxury of time that a volunteer does. Typically, he's working with 2 kids at a time in a sibling set to really get to know the child, understand their needs. They work very closely alongside with ProKids staff. They're supervised by a person called a CASA manager. They're the expert in social work, the child protection system, and a whole bunch of companion systems. therapeutic systems, medical systems, educational systems. So they're working constantly together. And then the third person on the advocacy team is a ProKids attorney. All these children are the subjects of what are called child protection cases in Hamilton County Juvenile Court, which oversees all the children in foster care.
Okay. Thank you.
I think people love stories, if you can. And then I think what would be really nice is, do you have a success story so that we can get a sense of what success looks like in your line of work?
Well, first of all, there's so many paths to success. One that I've been thinking about a lot lately is a young teen who came into the system. Her mother was in the throes of untreated alcoholism, and it didn't look good. A kid entering at that late age, there wasn't really a large support system around. The mother agreed to go into treatment, but she really wasn't engaged or participating. And one of the things I think about often, why I think about that case, is because our CASA volunteer, she spent time obviously getting to know the child very well, but she also visited the mother in her treatment program. And she was moved at one point to point something out very, very specific to the mother. And what she told her was, she said, have you ever noticed how when you and your daughter are visiting, how she absolutely lights up? And the mom said yes. And what our volunteer had the presence of mind to say is, I've seen her in so many different settings. You're the only person that she does that with. Now, how would the mother have known that?
Right.
Because if she's there, the child's lit up. The mother actually said that was the turning point for her, to begin to engage in treatment. Again, because so many of our parents are wounded themselves, they may not say it, but they think somebody could do a better job raising my kid than I could. And so that connection, that her unique, special meaning to her daughter, was something that had to be pursued. She completed treatment, she completed aftercare. Ultimately, they reunited. And then the mom let us know, she said, I want to speak publicly about this. And we said, well, why would you want to do that? And she said, one, it's a way of holding myself accountable. And two, I need people to understand what's possible.
Oh.
So that's, one aspect
Wow.
of thinking about it. Another is, an adoption finalization that just happened a couple of weeks ago, where there was not a path back to family. But the foster care family that was serving this child raised their hand and said, we would be happy to have him be part of our family forever. And to see the joy of that, to see the child's kind of chest swell with pride in all the pictures, becoming officially part of the family. And then, there are other ways that kids leave the system. We try and prevent as many as possible leaving without family or doing what's called aging out of the system, so older youth. And we had a young man who, he aged out. He had more than 20 placements as a child.
Wow.
He had been moved around among relatives even before coming into the system. And so he had a lot of anger. He had, right? He had experienced both abuse and neglect. But he also really understood about what I would say collecting people. And that combined with a real passion for education. He got his PhD in 2022.
Oh, wow.
That's success.
Yeah, it is, but it's his success.
Yeah.
We actually failed him because
How so?
he left the system without a family.
I see. Yeah.
So he is successful, but we have failed him.
Right.
Now, people will say that's a hell of a plan B. But the ultimate reward in our work is to be forgotten.
I see.
If you can get children somewhere where their needs are so fully met, they don't dwell on their time being in the system, and you get them out early enough that is not, their day-to-day memory, man, have we done our job. So he is an amazing person. He has insight I wish I had. But, we failed him. And it is a reminder to me that he deserved better. So that is the struggle.
Yeah, along those lines, I saw in some more research that you have a 95% success rate. You're guiding kids into safe homes, and of course there's that 5%, like this gentleman. So you would consider that a failure, but what other examples of what you would describe as a failure of the system or of the organization?
Well, part of it is...
And how do you cope, if I may?
Well, yeah, fair enough. I mean, part of it is it just takes too damn long, and the system is overwhelmed. There are lots of hardworking people throughout the system who come with the right intent, that willingness to serve, but it is unbelievably difficult. There are just shortages of all sorts of things. Foster care homes. There's, not enough foster care homes in our community. So it's not unusual in any given year for a third or more of the kids who are moved from Hamilton County to be placed in other counties across the state of Ohio. Once you move kids farther away, visitation, services with parents, all of that is complicated. And system professionals are needing to go visit the kids where they are. So suddenly a caseload might have exactly the same number of cases, but when a third of them are really a day's drive between visiting and driving back, that scarcity of time is dangerous. Because the system is overwhelmed, kids can languish, and they shouldn't stay a day longer. But it also can be very difficult to get them out. And that's why I focus, more and more increasingly, I'm thinking about family finding. How do we find those family members who can be a support to the child, a support to parents who are working to reunify, and if that doesn't work out, a possible placement for the child. So I think, to me, one of the things that I increasingly am thinking about is exit ramps. How do we provide exit ramps? Exit ramps are better for kids, they're better for families, but they also leave an overburdened system with fewer cases to manage. So I think, what I would say is people are working really hard, trying really hard. But I would also know that, and you all would know from the work that you do, is how trauma can also affect behavior. And so there's a certain logic that kids get into that causes them, for example, to bounce from foster care home to foster care home. If a kid thinks, hey, I'm not going to invest until I know you're invested, how do I figure that out? Testing you. I remember one kid, he spray painted the foster care parent's side of their garage within 30 minutes of arriving.
Wow.
And they put in their notice to have him removed. But you could see the logic, right? That he's trying to figure out, is this permanent? Is this for real? Do they care about me?
Right. I love you enough until you do something wrong. If you do something wrong and you're a hassle, we're all done, right?
Right. And so why wait? 30 minutes in, let's see where we are. So I think there are all sorts of contributory factors that cause kids to be less stable. And we know stability is really important. Every time a kid changes school placement, which they often will with every foster care placement, even if they're enrolled really quickly, they can lose up to 3 months of academic progress, that sort of thing. So there are tons and tons of challenges. And so I think one of the other ways that we fail is not mobilizing the community enough to help. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a social worker. You don't have to be a lawyer to actually help a kid right here in the community who's suffering.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that we're trying to do as a cathedral, in addition to providing financial support where we can, and we'll see what happens in this current market. But one of the things we wanted to start shifting towards, Father Brian's doing some of this, is advocacy, but also we really want to start focusing on developing relationships with community partners, where we can use the talent and the resources that we do have in our congregation and congregations, if we're talking about the diocese, and channeling them into places that of need, where people can put their gifts and skills to use. So can you say a little bit more about what it would take to become a CASA member, a volunteer?
So you do have to be 21.
Right.
Objectivity is awesome, because often the people who have the luxury to volunteer versus the folks who need help come from very different worlds. And so you have to have an open mind. The good news is, to start with us, all you have to do is be curious. We have informational sessions. You can even bypass that and simply talk to my coworker who does all of our intake, very experienced in child protection, and learn a little bit about the role. So all we're asking people to do is be curious and take some next steps. If people want to proceed into becoming a CASA volunteer, there's pre-service training. The classes are largely non-sequential. You can take them in any order. Okay. You could go through them in as quickly as about 2 months, or you could take up to 6 months, just what your schedule will allow. Once you have completed pre-service training and had a very extensive background check, as you can imagine, working with kids, you're then assigned to our advocacy team. So you'll have a CASA manager who then will start talking to you about the cases available and will match you to the case. There's a lot of learning that happens. At the beginning, your CASA manager is going to go visit the child with you, help you understand how the court process works. But you don't need to be an expert in all of that to be an expert in the child. You'll always work as part of a team, so you don't do this work alone. We just last week had what we call our High Five event, which is for volunteers who've been with us 5 years or more. And about 40% of our volunteers qualify for that.
That's great.
So we do call it the Pro Kids Quicksand. You dip your toe in, you're likely to get pulled under.
That's nice.
Yeah. For quicksand. It's nice. But it's
we liken our volunteers to the mafia. Once you're in, you're in.
That's right. That's right. I like that. But it is something really where people will talk themselves out of it even before they've been curious, because they assume if you don't have a background in social work, if you aren't a lawyer, that you somehow can't do this, or they think it's going to take so much time, it's not possible. We have been surveying our volunteers for 15 plus years about how much time they spend in an average month. It's about 10 hours a month, and it's extraordinarily flexible. So it's very doable.
Sounds like that. And in terms of your work, and which I would describe as like ours, is a vocation call, of which you've dedicated 30 years of your life to, and knowing what we've all been through as far as COVID and all the stresses therein, and even before that with just the work that we've taken on, caring for other people is hard work because it requires that self-emptying. What do you do, if we may ask, to fill yourself back up so you can keep on keeping on with your bad self?
Well, I think part of it is we have such a special blend at Pro Kids. And what I mean by that is when you are welcoming in, we have about 300 CASA volunteers right now. People who come with the idea fundamentally that just because our kids are in foster care, they shouldn't lack for anything. They shouldn't do without. If they think to themselves sometimes, if the kid I raised, I wouldn't, no way. So I'm not going to allow this kid either. So it breaks any thought of system think, to have this constant influx of the community to say, these kids deserve the best. And that is a really good place to start in a system that is so overburdened, overwhelmed, that sort of thing. So that renews my hope, my spirit. Now, sometimes you have to have a poker face on because, I remember distinctly a volunteer years ago who said, I think this child needs to be in private school. The child was in elementary school, 3 years behind. She was already using substances, and she was already sexually active. And, we're trying to follow this path that the volunteer is laying out about why she thinks she needs to go to private school. She said, I know the exact setting. I'd like her to go there. We said, well, the system doesn't have funds for that. She said, I'm a runner. I'm going to get better at it, and I will raise money through running. She eventually qualified for the Boston Marathon. Oh, wow. She got sponsors. She raised money. She helped this kid then transfer to Purcell Marion, which is where she eventually wanted her to go. She tutored her herself, especially over summers, actually got her back on track to be at grade level. And so that's why I say you have to have a poker face, because if someone tells you what they're going to do and you think, I'm not sure that's possible, why get in their way? We had a volunteer who is a Vietnam combat veteran, and just a gentle soul, though. And we had a case with 3 young girls, grandparents who really didn't have the resources and the means to necessarily keep their granddaughters long term. And he would lean over to me in court. I happened to be the attorney on the case, and he would whisper to me, this is going to be a storybook ending. Right as something was going on that indicated it was likely not going to be a storybook ending. And so that kind of hope and spirit renews me time and time again. He turned out he was exactly right. He pulled in some community resources to help rehab the house, including helping finish the basement so there was more room, et cetera. And ultimately, the kids were placed in the custody of their grandparents permanently. So that renews you. And then, our staff are amazing people. They're dedicated, fierce advocates. So that's also very fueling. I have a really silly dog at home who breaks me from all of this.
What kind of dog?
So she is a combination of things and not what they told us when we adopted her.
I can relate to that.
It turns out there's no corgi in her. There's a lot of Chihuahua, some pit bull, some Pomeranian, some, according to the DNA, if you believe it. But what I would say is it's very rewarding work, but it is not work that you put down when you go home.
Right.
Yeah, it is not. And so, that is some of the trade-off for being able to help provide an environment where these now hundreds of advocates and staff can help change the arc of kids' lives. So, we sweat the details. We cherish the details of our kids' lives, and we're constantly thinking, how do we get them to that safe, permanent, nurturing home? So I don't know that I'm, I keep moving forward. I don't know that I'm wise in terms of how it actually happens.
Right.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
It happens, but who knows how?
I don't know how, right? Exactly.
That's for sure. And speaking of new,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the new space that you opened up in 2024 that we had a chance to tour with you. And
Yeah.
how's it working out?
Oh, it's amazing. It is 5 times larger than our previous location. And just to give you a sense of what was happening is we had started to look in 2018 for a new space, and we're not finding much. And by 2020, I wasn't shown a single new space, and we had totally outgrown. I didn't even have a workstation for every coworker at that point. Our largest gathering space could hold uncomfortably about 25 people, and our staff was 50 plus. So, right? So I called someone, a supporter of ours who had been periodically advising me on the search in early 21, and said, what else should we be doing? And he said, do you remember when you told me you'd look at anything? Were you actually serious? I said, oh, God, yes. So he gave me the address. I met him on the corner of 7th and Vine. Very large space, 22,000 square feet, but not a single wall, no utilities, windows boarded up. And I thought, wow, we could design this from scratch. But it was also so much larger than any other space we ever had. I really thought, well, I'll probably have to build a wall. There's no way we'll be able to take the whole space, until we started talking about the terms. And I asked him, the owner, what he was thinking. And he said, I'm thinking 0 rent for 100 years. And so then a lot of things became possible at that point. We could take the whole space. We are going to be closing out soon our campaign that helped fund the space, but also is funding our growth. But without that particular act of generosity, we would not have the space. And what's so amazing about that is what we could dream then is where in the past we've moved on average every 8 years. We could think of a generational home for pro kids, and we could think of a convening space for child protection. And so I call 2024 shot out of a cannon, because we've been convening partners, convening all sorts of organizations and groups, and having some really healthy, robust discussions about what's needed next for our kiddos.
Amen.
So you found a landlord who doesn't charge you rent
Correct.
for 100 years
Correct.
for over 20,000 square feet.
Correct. With parking attached, because we have 300 volunteers, so we need abundant parking.
Yeah.
So we're incredibly blessed. Yeah, right?
Wow.
I mean, isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
So it's game changing. And then
Yeah.
because we could design it to our specifications, that has really made it the most incredibly useful tool. So there's a lot more untapped potential even in terms of how we use the space, but we're thrilled to be there. And we view ourselves with you all as bookends in downtown, holding it all together.
That's right.
So
It's easily accessible for folks to come to, and then you get to the courthouse and all those things.
correct.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our tour, and I was jealous of the social space.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it's really great.
It's and part of it, when you ask how you do this work, I mean, part of it is the way that, for example, doing this work can be lonely, and especially for volunteers, because they often know no one else who does this, is they may share appropriately, not with any identifying information, some trial and tribulation on the case they're working with a neighbor, a friend, a spouse. And guess what the number one response is? Why do you do it? Why are you doing that? The importance of gathering in community with child advocates is everybody already knows why you do it.
Right.
You know, now we can problem solve, we can even have some fun with each other, that sort of thing, but everybody already knows why you do it. So that's the power of gathering, and that's why we designed the spaces we did to allow for a lot of that.
In the Maasai culture, there's a question that they ask, and how are the children? And the response is, all the children are well. And it really highlights how they value their children and how they measure the success or the failure of the entire culture by that question, by the children's well-being. So my question to you is, and how are the children? And yeah.
So I probably don't have the most encouraging answer to start with, but I hope to end with some encouragement. So the pandemic in particular has been an incredibly difficult time for kids in child protection. We often describe it as an extra layer of chaos that has been put on top of kids' lives that were already torn apart. But even beyond kids working who are in the child protection system, we certainly see other people suffering within their families. And so in the last 6 months or so, I have had people spontaneously say to me, well-resourced people, leaders in their field, leaders in their community, talk about the struggles of their own children. And so what they're talking about are increasing rates of anxiety, depression, social isolation after being off of school for so long, et cetera. And so that, combined with some of the things that are happening both locally, statewide, nationally, regarding children, and who is going to be kind of accepted and considered part of the fold and who is not. You know, it sometimes feels like a war on children.
Indeed.
So
I concur. I mean, just hearing what's coming out of Florida as far as some of the child labor laws that they're trying to bring back, it really is a disturbing thing. And having, you know, as a father of two boys and seeing what COVID did to them, it is a very challenging time. And then, of course, all the existential stuff around climate, and it's really a lot for these kids. My hope for my sons, as well as for the kids that you serve, and for all the kids generally, is that we will recognize as the adults, as the matriarchs and patriarchs of our village, of the need for their care and nourishment, and the wisdom of the elders that we can pass on. So one of the things that I'm hoping that our diocese can do, our cathedral can do, as part of the diocese, because we have a camp called Proctor Camp and Conference Center, and we're looking to, you know, how can we provide scholarships for kids that you can identify that might benefit from some green space. And I think if we can partner with other dioceses, other camps, and really invest in creating some retreat space, some sanctuary space for these kids, that might be something, at least.
absolutely.
To stem some of the tide there and to assist where we're able. And
It,
so I would
it
just love
does,
that
but it's
opportunity.
it's also this opportunity to speak to both of you today, to have this shared with your congregation, because at the end of the day, it's really about people standing up for kids, speaking up for kids. And, you know, thinking about that mobilized community. And I do fundamentally believe that an antidote to despair is action.
Yes.
And, we have seen that time and time again. I've been here long enough, over 30 years, to see different horrible things happen that have affected children across the board. But, our children are the canary in the coal mine. They're often the most vulnerable. They don't have that support system. And so to see, at what risk they can, suffer, but also at the same time see the power of a mobilized community. And if people are feeling hopeless, if they're feeling despair, if they're feeling a lack of sense of agency, this is the very kind of thing to raise your hand, be curious about.
Right.
So that you can help change the arc of the child's life before you, but also because you're breaking that vicious cycle of abuse and neglect and creating a new cycle of growing up safe and confident. You actually have impact on their future children's lives and therefore our entire community. So I think there's a lot to be done here. As hard as it is, as tough as the times are, the kids are at risk in ways that are very extreme, but we have power as adults we can take advantage of to serve these children.
I love that you said that. I don't want to monopolize this moment, but I just love that you said it, because one of my frustrations, and I'm sure you can relate, Brian, when you're doing your parish priest years, is you do encounter in the life of the church all the lamentation, the rendering of the proverbial garments and beating of breasts and so on, because we look at the world like, we're all frustrated, but I'm like, there is something we can do.
Correct.
If you just, but it's like so many times we call for volunteers, and as much as the sound, the clarion call rather sounds great. Yeah. People don't necessarily show up. But here's something we can point to that has a success rate of 95%. Yeah. And you create clear pathways for people to utilize, again, those gifts and those skills to affect positive change, to do something to stem the tide, to change the narrative and the paradigm of despair to what I call active hope, right? There's passive hope, which is, I hope it works out. Right. And then there's active, I'm going to do something about this because I have that hope. And so that's what I'm really excited to, with Brian, create channels and bridges and opportunities for our membership and others to say, you can do something. Here's the steps you can take. Even if it's not doing the CASA, but necessarily, if you need like Christmas gifts or something, nature, reading or tutoring or whatever it is. There's ways we can do this work, and I am encouraged in the moment we currently find ourselves that there is an awakening across the spectrum, awakening, I think, within our country right now to activism and to change the narrative. And so I'm just really glad that you're doing what you're doing, and so we can ask that question: how the children one day say, and all the children are well. Right. Being the answer.
Well, and that is the ultimate answer. Yeah. And in the meantime, the children need someone right there beside them.
That's right.
And we often think about how kids go through the system. So imagine, you're taken from the only family you've ever known and placed with strangers, no matter how well-intentioned. That's a layer of trauma on top of the trauma of abuse and neglect you've already suffered. And so you think about fearful and anxious is absolutely not the way to go through childhood. Yeah. And so part of what a CASA volunteer does is provides that steady, reassuring presence. They are truly often the safe and trusted adult in some of the children's darkest moments. And so what a joy is that, to be able to bring comfort. I mean, I was raised, my dad told me even as a child that real power was comforting a child. And so that is in fact what we can do. Yeah. And so people just need to be curious and find out that they actually have power they had no idea they had.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, I'm just grateful for all the work that you do. I'm glad, Owen, that you mentioned, we can find ways to partner. So I would look forward to deepening our relationship.
That sounds
and
awesome.
Pulling up alongside of what you guys do in any way that we can. I know that we do already have a CASA volunteer here.
We do.
And he also volunteers on Sunday to feed people who are currently unhoused.
Okay, that's wonderful.
And so he gives of his time joyfully.
That's wonderful.
We've got one.
That's wonderful. Let's keep them coming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I look forward to doing more and more work with you guys.
That sounds great. And I can just tell you and share with your congregation that there's a child waiting for them. There literally is. So.
And I just want to also echo thanksgiving to you and the work that you all are doing. And please convey that to your membership.
Thank you.
And it really does take that village, that proverbial village. And I'm just glad that there are others on the front line doing the work, reminding us, to borrow the line from Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, that there is goodness in this world still worth fighting for.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I'm just really excited to work with you in any way that we can. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And
thank you.
In addition to your practice of the particular area, what else, other kind of law do you delve into?
Oh no, so it's all child protection all the time.
I needed some counsel.
But I know a lot of people in the local
great.
legal community.
That
Let me
sounds
know.
good.
Yes, and we have even some volunteer attorneys who've been amazing for us.
Take you up on
But
that.
I just want to thank the two of you too for welcoming us as neighbors, as bookends of downtown.
Yeah.
And just your willingness to be open and engage and mobilize your community around our kids. So thank you.
Thank you. Blessings. And that concludes yet another episode of Holy Chaos. And I want to thank our guest, Tracy Cook, and all her team at Pro Kids. I want to thank my partner in ministry, Father Brian, here for joining me with this wonderful opportunity that is ours to share our stories and to be on the front lines with partners like Tracy and others, affecting positive change, creating that holy chaos and disrupting the system so that we can bring about the beloved community, God's kingdom on earth, one day, one moment, one child, if necessary, at a time. Keep on keeping on, y'all. See you soon.